So you meet a narcissistic person. Maybe it's someone you meet at work, or maybe it's someone you meet socially, or maybe if it's even a first or second date. Maybe it's a family member or someone you don't see that often in your family. The narcissistic person strolls in with their imperious, arrogant swagger. They start talking their usual grandiose claptrap, and you find yourself nodding, eyes wide. You throw in a few words like, wow, that's amazing. Whoa, that's really cool. But there's a war inside of you. There's one voice inside of you that's shaming you, literally saying to you, what the hell are you doing? Why are you talking to this toxic fool? Walk away or gray rock. Why are you making this worse? What is wrong with you? Why are you telling them they're so great? And then yet there's this other part of you that's just sort of smiling and pleasing and soothing this narcissistic person in front of you. What the you know what? But the fact is, we've all been there, haven't we? So let's talk about the fourth F in the sympathetic nervous system response. And this F is called the fawn response. Now, this series takes on the issue of the sympathetic nervous system and how it's affected by narcissistic relationships and narcissistic abuse. Our sympathetic nervous system's a great system, like an emergency generator, but like an emergency generator, it's not meant to be your sole source of power. So this series sort of breaks that down to help you have better command and understanding of what's happening to you. And as always, please, oh please, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you actually find it helpful. And please don't forget, subscribe to this channel, join this great community. Sometimes you might say, damn, the comments are more worthwhile than the video, and I'm fine with that because I tend to agree. So please do join us. So I've really enjoyed reading and sharing the work of Pete Walker. He's a therapist who's based in Northern California, and he writes extensively on trauma, post-trauma, and complex trauma. And if you're interested in his work, if you're interested in these kinds of topics, I do suggest that you check out his website. You can find the link to his website in the top right corner of the screen, and he really does have some extensive writings and things on that website. Now, he's the one who I first saw adding this sort of fourth F, the fawn. Now, to fawn or fawning is characterized as appeasing someone, pleasing them, giving in, not questioning them, and loosening your boundaries in their presence, and doing it almost instantly without thinking. It takes me back. I remember once meeting someone who was sort of a powerful muckety-muck in the industry that they worked in and were in. And in our encounter, this person started saying things that were actually sort of offensive, not sort of, were offensive to me. They were classist, they were elitist, and this person really was an ass. Now, you know, I've been honest, I got me my trauma and narcissism issues, and I gotta tell you, I almost felt mildly dissociated as I watched trauma fawning Dr. RAMANI shaking her head as this fool was talking, furrowing her brow, saying, wow, gosh, that's really interesting. And I wanted to beat her for doing that. My authentic self wanted to look at this guy and say, read a book, get some therapy, be self-reflective for 1 minute of your miserable life, and recognize that you are the human equivalent of a pile of crap stinking up every space you are in. But no, I didn't do that. I gotta say, my fight response is notoriously weak. I go, as I do, I went right to fawn. And after that interaction with this guy, I felt actually more disgusted with myself than I was with this dude. And in the future, when I had the misfortune of seeing this guy around, I would turn to flight and I would get the hell out of there. Better than fawning, I guess, right? Now, I would love to know if any of you ever had a fawn experience, when something similar might have happened to you. How did you feel about yourself afterwards if you fawned? And the next time you saw this person, did you find that you were still a fawner, or did you go to one of the other Fs? Drop that in the comment. Let's make that a conversation for all of you to have to sort of see, are there other fawners out there? A lot of us do it. Now, the fawning, like all sympathetic nervous system responses, is a safety behavior. Walker argues that it is something that is learned by people early on who grew up in abusive childhood environments. And my read on his stuff is that he really is describing narcissistically abusive homes. Now, think about it. A child can't really fight when they're going to get harmed. They can't really flight. They can barely freeze. So what do? They learn to survive by appeasing, pleasing, and fawning. He goes on to make the really strong argument that as a child grows up in one of these family systems, that he sees what so many of us observe in those who come from narcissistic family systems. The child often in these systems tries to grow up to be helpful, which is the ultimate fawn in one of these family systems. It doesn't even become a response to, they're always trying to be helpful because it becomes a child's way of being safe. They'll do things like they'll do the chores, they'll get good grades, they'll abandon their own needs in favor of what they think their narcissistic parents want or need. And they avoid ever being a bother to their parents. Just like in an adult trauma-bonded relationship, where you feel that in order to stay or keep this relationship, you become all things to your partner, right? You become their friend, you become their partner, you're their personal assistant, you're their cook, you're their butler, you're their mechanic, you're their emotional punching bag, you're their therapist, right? To do all that to stay in one of those relationships. The same thing happens for the fawning child who takes on every role with the parent. They become the house cleaner, the personal assistant, the best friend, the therapist. They help with younger siblings. They prepare meals. Now, it'd be interesting to know if any of that was experienced for any of you with a narcissistic parent. Please, again, drop that comment. How has fawning played out in your relationships? Now, the fawn response means the person protects and safeguards themselves when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, because the threatening narcissistic person shows up, and that's when we fawn. And the way we fawn, we do that by admiring and appeasing the narcissist. It even looks to the world. If somebody's watching sort of a whole fawning thing happen, it looks to the world that you're actually really interested in the other person. That's how convincing our fawn response is to other people. Going back to that initial point, though, remember that our sympathetic nervous system responses are about safety and doing what we need in that instance when our sympathetic nervous system gets turned on to be safe. Fawning is no different. Now, I know some of you right now may be thinking, hey, Dr. RAMANI, what's the difference between fawning and fluffing? Fluffing is intentional, and it's what we call agentic. It's a short-term strategy. It's something you're kind of in control of, you're aware of, and you're doing it actively to get something done. So for example, you may be in a job with an atrocious narcissistic boss, and you need to get through a deadline, so you fluff. And you say things like, oh gosh, I'm so lucky to work with you. You are so smart. Oh my God, your experience in this area is amazing. I feel so lucky to be a part of this team. And then you fluff them, you get past the deadline without too much tyranny, and hopefully after that deadline you get transferred to a new division or find a new job. And if you're fluffing, you may find yourself disgusted at the whole situation and having to say these things each night when you go home from work. Fluffing really does take a toll on your authenticity, and it's really only good for short-term sprints or bursts. Nobody can do that in the long term. Now, fawning is involuntary and it's reflexive, like all sympathetic nervous system responses. You go there, or it happens, when you feel threatened. And it tends to be a sympathetic nervous system response, like I said, that gets cultivated in childhood, when a child has narcissistic parents and the child is just trying to survive the nightmare of that kind of childhood. And just as a side note, those that don't fawn, the children who don't fawn, and instead they're the ones who may be the fighters or the flighters in a family system, those are the kids that often turn to rebellion as their way of sort of managing the sympathetic nervous system of it all. And they may have greater risk of turning to drugs, alcohol, sexual acting out at school, instead of being the straight A dishwasher emptying model citizen child. And some people do both. They may start as perfect fawners and then later on do the fight-flight kind of rebel thing. Now, the challenge as I see it is when people fawn in the presence of a toxic person or a narcissistic person, they end up getting angry at themselves. afterwards, they will feel ashamed at themselves for not just walking away and not getting into the, ooh, ah, you're so amazing. But remember, these fawn responses are ancient. They started in childhood, early childhood. So there's a little you that is just trying to stay safe. And sometimes when you can think of that child you may be less likely to get as angry at yourself and recognize that that little kid is just trying to protect themselves now and then. And ultimately, once you recognize that the sympathetic nervous system reaction is coming up in yourselves when you're in the face of a narcissist, and you recognize what you're up against, you hopefully learn to gracefully step away because there's no point in engaging. Now, don't get mad at your sympathetic nervous system. All you can do is consider it sort of your overprotective, overzealous security guard. But if you are a fawner, it's important to know that about yourself. Don't get upset at yourself. Recognize the function it served and serves. Don't blame yourself. Don't shame yourself. Recognize that you were not responsible for the invalidation that occurred during your childhood. Healing from narcissistic abuse starts with surviving. And you have to do that first if you're going to graduate to thriving. So thanks again, as always, for tuning in. I am Dr. Ramani. I hope you know that. And if you're new to my channel, introducing myself then, please consider subscribing and turning on the notifications so you don't miss any of the daily videos. They may be on exactly the topic you want to understand when it comes to narcissism. And got to give me a little validation, right? Everyone needs some. Please give this video a thumbs up if you did indeed find it helpful. Thanks again.